We are pain, that's all. We are God.
Yo guys! I'm Yuruzi. I'm back with the part 3. This is what if Naruto was sent to the world of Inuyasha. Naruto has lost everything in the final battle. He is asked to aid a group in their journey. But will his own grief and pain get in the way? Or will this new group heal his broken soul? Don't forget to hit like and subscribe and check the author in the description. Let's start. Chapter 13, A Broken Wind. The jewel never ceased to mesmerize him. The beautiful deadly colors that sang from it, the deep magenta of sunset, the bright fuchsia of anger, the pink of a spring blossom, they all enthralled him. The facets sparkled deep within the nearly completed shuriken with their own light. This was the key to ultimate power, and rarely did it take such a beautiful form. The Dark Lord could stare at the jewel for hours, idly dreaming of its vast, untapped potential. The Dark Hanyu was startled from his enjoyable contemplation by a purple-black miasma that erupted in the center of his shadowed room. Red eyes narrowing angrily, he waited as the swirl of purple-pierced blackness condensed and fell away, revealing the broken, naked woman that lay huddled on the tatami-matted floor. The female yokai was curled into a fetal position, gasps of pain shuddering through the cringing form. Long tangles of wavy black hair barely covered pasty white skin. Singed and burned raw in various places, none of the recent wounds could match the distinctive spider mark burned into her back. Normally sharp claws were torn off at the tips, and she bled sullenly in places where she had been lacerated. The limp awkwardness of some of her extremities showed that her delicate bones had been fractured in many spots. Kagura! The voice sent a deep shudder through the woman. A single tear slipped out of one tightly closed eye as she tried to curl away from that awful voice. The Dark Lord smiled at the wind yokai's terror. Terror was an aphrodisiac to the Dark Hanyu. He relished it like a fine wine, studying the dark layers of pain with an eye to its beauty, smelling the delicate aroma of aroused fear, tasting the delicious fright in all its pain and helplessness. Terror was erotic. He wondered idly if he should take the female yokai here and now. Her broken body, so helpless to move, might prove more entertaining than the times he had commanded her to lie with him, her angry defiance controlled by the clutch of her heart in his hand. Her pain and terror as he took her now, helpless and broken, might alleviate some of his anger at her failure. But no. Sexual gratification could be gotten anywhere. Any pitiful peasant girl, brought to the heights of terror by judicious use of pain and threat, could assuage his dark lust. Lying with the broken yokai would be like lying with the dead. And there was only one corpse he would ever consider taking to his bed, and she, in her cold contempt, was still as yet unattainable. Long moments of silence stretched on, as the Dark Hanyu studied the broken yokai cowering on the tatami mats. Finally, the terrified woman could stand it no more, and opened frightened red eyes to stare at the shadowed form of her master. The Hanyu Naraku was deadly, but mesmerizing. His beauty was dark and threatening. Thick black hair tumbled in sensuous curls down his back, and a well-muscled chest was revealed by the casual openness of his purple robes. The white fur of a baboon's skin draped his lower body like the swirl of a frothy wave. Narrow red eyes regarded the woman coldly. You have failed me. Again. The eyes closed tightly, another tear following the track of the first down her pale cheek. You are useless to me now. You have lost your control on the winds. The Dark Lord flicked a hand at the wind yokai's empty, burnt fingers. The purifying wave that had attacked the wind sorceress had split her fan in two. Kagura flinched in remembered pain. When the fan broke, she had felt as if she herself was splitting apart. The fan had been as much of her incarnation as she herself had been. Without it, she was powerless. I should kill you. The Hanyu looked at the nearly completed shuriken no Tama that he clutched in one hand. The woman shuddered, unable to speak as fear clutched her soul. A nasty smile curved the sensuous lips. No. The Dark Lord said thoughtfully. That would be too easy. A slight whimper from the broken yokai made Naraku laugh softly, a sensual sound that sent chills down the woman's back as she lay defenseless before him. Naraku. She whispered, the pitiful plea an opiate to the Dark Lord. He stood up, allowing the white furs to slither down and pool on the floor beneath him. Idly turning the jewel in one hand, He studied the broken woman for long moments, contemplating the perfect punishment for her ineptitude. Time and again, he had given the wind sorceress chances to dispose of the worthless dog Hanyu and his Ningen allies, and time and again she had failed. Naraku lifted his other hand, and a red glow suffused the palm. He could not resist squeezing the heart of his incarnation, relishing the feel of his power over the yokai. The woman screamed, a faint wisp of sound, as pain coursed through her broken, burnt body. The Hanyu laughed, his eyes brightening with lust at the pain. "What if I was to return your heart to you, Kagura?" he asked casually, stepping closer to the white body. Kneeling beside the broken sorceress, he waved the glowing essence of her heart above her, taunting. The yokai opened her eyes, tears sparkling like jeweled diamonds in the ruby depths. "Beautiful." Naraku breathed in the smell of her fear. "Please." The woman shuddered in pitiful terror. "Do you know what you are asking for, Kagura?" The voice wrapped itself around her. Smirking, the Dark Lord opened his palm, allowing the red essence of the woman's heart to spill gently around the wind yokai. The pulsing red mist fell slowly toward the broken body, and then sunk into the white skin, vanishing as it touched the yokai. For a moment, the form was still, and then the faint throb of a heartbeat shuddered through her. A breath of pitiful gratitude turned into a gasp of pain as another heartbeat throbbed through the broken woman. "Naraku!" The woman whispered hoarsely in pain, eyes closed tight as shudders racked the burnt body. "Stupid sorceress!" Naraku smiled. "You are now whole, but what does that gain you? You now know the true pain of your injuries and defeat. By rights, you should have died in the purifying wave of that Ningen girl, and yet you lived, because I held your heart in my hand. I shielded you from certain death. But now you have back what you have so long sought. Is it as wonderful as you always dreamed, Kagura?" The awful voice was as soft as a lover's kiss, and as poisonous as a snake bite. The woman could only gasp with sobs as pain throbbed through every inch of her body. Every fractured bone, every spot burnt raw by the sacred wave tingled with vibrant agony, the pain twice as powerful as before. Each beat of her heart, long denied her, sent pain coursing through her blood in renewed torment. The Dark Lord watched the woman's suffering with delight. He couldn't resist running a clawed hand over her naked form, pressing here and there to send more pain to clench the writhing sorceress. He caressed the pale cheek of her face with the gentlest of touches, relishing the wetness of her tears on his fingers. Smiling softly, he dragged one sharpened claw tip down her cheek. A hoarse, choked scream followed the drag of his poisonous claw. The faint hiss as her red blood hit the purple-black drops of his poison was sensuous to the Dark Hanyo's ears. The broken woman writhed in pain beneath him, and Naraku felt his desire rising. Perhaps the pathetic yokai would be pleasurable after all. He could torture the little sorceress for hours, dragging each helpless scream from her with infinite patience and care. But even as the red in his eyes grew hotter with lust, the pitiful woman shuddered, gasping, and fainted from the pain. Disgusted, Naraku stood up. Glaring at the unconscious woman with contempt, he wondered spitefully what to do with the useless yokai. She was too damaged to ever be of any more use to him, not that she had ever done anything but fail him. He scowled and turned to the pale form of his other incarnations. "Kana." The girl remained with her face, entirely void and expressionless, throughout the entire scene. Not even showing a sliver of emotion. With a wave of his hand the mirror glowed and then showed the images he sought. He smiled a slow, cruel, taunting smile. If the wolf wanted her, then he would get her. Indeed, that would be a fitting punishment. The Inu group were currently sitting around a campfire. "Done." Kagome's voice rang out through the group as she smiled at the several steaming cups of instant ramen she had recently made. The entire group grabbed their cups, with an extra 3 for Inuyasha. Yet Kagome believed that she should probably have made more for some strange reason that she couldn't really explain. "Ikedemitsu." Sango, Miroku and Shippu all exclaimed as they split their chopsticks, but then paused just before they started eating and turned to Naruto, who was now laying down his cup in front of Kagome and smiling. "That was good," he complimented the astonished girl. He then stretched and walked over to a tree and then proceeded to lay down, completely ignoring the gawking stares of the rest of the group. Inuyasha then jumped down from his perch on the tree where he had been eating his ramen and marched over to get another. "What the hell?" he cried out in anger as he noticed that each of them were missing. He sniffed the air and caught the scent coming from his right. He turned and there laid Naruto happily snoring away beneath the tree. The infuriated Hanyu walked over and noticed that indeed all 3 empty cups were just a few feet away from him. Inuyasha growled in anger and unsheathed Tetsusaiga, holding it high above his head as he prepared to bring it down on the ninja. "Eat my ramen, will you, Inuyasha?" Kagome cried as she moved forward and stood in front of the angry Hanyu. Before he could swing, however, a strong wind came from the east, forcing everyone to cover their eyes. When they reopened them, Inuyasha had his face in the dirt with Koga standing on top of him while grasping Kagome's hands in his. "Kagome, how's my woman today and where's that stupid mutt?" the wolf asked as he started looking around. Naruto yawned as he rolled in his sleep. "You're standing on top of him," he deadpanned. Koga jumped slightly at the unfamiliar voice and turned to Naruto as he finally noticed him. "Who the hell are you?" Naruto yawned again. "The guy that wants to sleep," he stated flatly. Koga stared at a few moments before he turned to Inuyasha at his feet. "Hey Muttface, you better have been taking good care of my woman while I've been gone. And who the hell is this weirdo with the mask?" Inuyasha's voice was muffled since his face was still firmly in the ground, having been held there by Koga's foot. "DMF Kuda MMMGMN Fill you Fen MMMETHP Fom Tear. Translation: Damn you Koga, I'm gonna kill you when I get up from here. You know, for two guys that say they love the same woman, they sure do spend most of the time around her with their attention on each other," Naruto thought as he rolled in his sleep again. Inuyasha finally managed to heave himself off the ground, his anger at Naruto now being directed at Koga. "That's it. You're dead, you mangy wolf. Just try it, Muttface," the wolf prince said with his usual cocky smirk. With a growl and a lunge from the dog-eared Hanyu, the two began their usual brawl, making Kagome and everyone else, other than Naruto, sigh tiredly. Seconds later, Jinta and Hakaku running out of the tree line, panting hard as they tried to heave air back into their lungs. "Man, I wish Koga would slow down at least a little bit," Hakaku said to Jinta. The other could only nod as he continued panting. "Jinta! Hakaku!" Kagome called to them as she waved happily. She had always liked the two wolves that traveled with Koga, even if they were a little on the slow side. "Oh, hi Kagome," Jinta said as he happily began walking over. "Hey wait, if you're here then where's Crash Mangy Wolf? Never mind," Hakaku muttered as he walked towards the campsite. Kagome smiled as she walked over to the campfire again. "I can make more ramen if you're hungry." The two immediately perked up at this. They remembered the last time they had tried the stuff that Kagome had called ramen. "Sure," they answered simultaneously as they sat down. Minutes later, Kagome handed them 2 steaming cups of ramen. The two were practically salivating at the scent of the delicious broth. Just before they managed to dig in, however, they both felt a tap on their shoulders. They each turned and saw a masked shinobi with glowing red eyes and a fearsome aura of malice about him. Genjutsu and killer intent. They both screamed as they leapt back, but then noticed something. The ramen cups were gone. They looked back up, just in time to catch the 2 empty containers. They stared at the plastic cylinders in astonishment. When they looked back up, Naruto was already laying down by the tree again. "Hey! How the hell did you do that?" Jinta and Hakaku cried out simultaneously. They then turned to the Inu group, who were each rubbing dirt out of their eyes. "How the hell did he do that? And who the hell is he?" Kagome blinked tears to get the dirt out of her eyes. "That's Naruto, and we don't know how he did that. We don't know how he does anything," Shippu chimed in as he continued to rub his eyes. Naruto yawned and moved to roll over when his senses picked up something just at the edge of his awareness. He stood and turned to face the direction that it was coming from. It felt faint, weak. To the astonishment of most, Koga and Inuyasha suddenly stopped mid-fight just before Kagome was forced to sit the Hanyu, and they both began sniffing the air. Koga suddenly let out a feral growl before rushing off into the trees. "Stupid wolf's gonna get himself killed," Inuyasha snorted before rushing off after him. "Hey wait a minute Koga," Jinta and Hakaku called out to the speeding wolf. "Bye Kagome," Jinta called out as he ran. "Hope we'll see ya again." The group stared after them for several seconds before Naruto spoke up. "Well now, doesn't that seem interesting?" he stated before leaping up to the tree tops to give chase. The rest of the Inu group glanced at each other before scrambling for their weapons. Naruto rushed through the trees, passing Jinta and Hakaku easily along with Inuyasha's mid-jounin level speed easily. As he neared Koga, he was forced to push chakra into his feet in order to pass. The guy was as fast as Kakashi. Koga was rushing through the forest when he suddenly caught movement in his peripheral vision. He turned his head slightly and was shocked to see the strange masked human that was now traveling with Kagome pass him by and continue to get farther and farther away. What the hell? No humans faster than me. Hell, hardly any demons are faster than me. Except maybe the Teiyokais. He snarled as he forced himself to move even faster. Naruto silently landed on a tree branch above his target. He looked down on the broken form of the woman beneath him. Raven black hair, pale porcelain skin and the tattered remains of a red and white kimono. He leapt down and stared at her face. Kagura? He said, sounding a bit more bored mixed in with mild surprise. Her hair was matted against her forehead, drenched in sweat and blood, her eyes shut tight in pain, curled up in the fetal position in a desperate attempt to alleviate some of the pain. He moved forward but stopped and snapped his head up as Koga exploded from the forest, sending splinters and wood flying everywhere. His eyes clouded with a deep rage. Naruto narrowed his eyes. This just got complicated. Koga snarled as he reared back his claws and prepared to deliver the death blow to the wind sorceress. However, he nearly cried out in pain as he was forcefully stopped by a firm grip on his wrist. He turned and found Naruto's masked form holding him, his face, a strange mixture of laziness and seriousness. Now, isn't this just a tad bit unfair? He stated more than asked. Koga growled darkly as he took a swipe at the ninja. Naruto twisted himself back and then went under his swing, bringing his hands up in a palm thrust. He slammed them into Koga's stomach, knocking the wind right out of him and sending him sprawling back. Koga moved to get up but then realized he couldn't move his limbs. He tried again, but again nothing. Now he started to panic. The paralysis will pass. Naruto spoke up. Koga managed to move his eyes enough to look at him. The blonde took out a paper seal. I placed one of these on you. Medics in my village often use it on the field as a quick anesthesia. But this one is designed to last for quite a while. Let me go. Koga growled. I'm gonna kill that bitch. Naruto waved around his hand in a dismissive gesture. Now that's a stupid thing to do. Koga moved to speak but Naruto stopped him before he could. Now, I don't want to explain the same thing 8 times, so we're gonna wait for everyone else to get here. Seconds later Inuyasha came through the trees and looked at the 3 others before him and crossed his arms, glaring at Naruto. You better have a good explanation for this. Naruto nodded. A few minutes later Jinta and Hakaku also bounded up. They each went to Koga but a sharp glare from both Inuyasha and Naruto stopped them dead. Then finally the rest of the gang arrived. Alright, Naruto. Why is that bitch still alive? Inuyasha asked in his usual gruff manner. Naruto shrugged. It would be stupid to kill her now. But she's weak now, surely this is the greatest opportunity. Sango said as she began unhooking her hireikatsu. Naruto blinked and crossed his arms. Didn't I teach you to plan ahead? The reason Naraku has always been beating or escaping is because unlike all of you he has been staying ahead of you by 3 or 4 steps. He plans and executes his plans when the time is just right. He looked to Inuyasha. Is it not true that Naraku once defended Kagura from your wind scar by placing a horde of yokai in front of her to take the damage? Inuyasha nodded. Then that shows you that he had a purpose for her, a reason to keep her alive. Now that this reason is no more, he has delivered her to us. Or more specifically to Wolfman over here. Because of his fierce hatred for her he would have killed her without a second thought, especially now that she's weak. So, it's quite simple, we keep her alive for information. She must know where Naraku's whereabouts are, making it much easier to find him. But Kagura has tried to kill us in the past. How do we know this isn't some sort of a trap? How many of you would have gotten here before Koga? They each glanced at each other. How many of you would have defended her? Silence. Koga would have killed her. Meaning that my interference is a factor that he most likely didn't plan on. If Kagura is not a fanatical loyalist to him, I doubt she will protect him. The information she has will be taken from her and we will use it against Naraku. Still, she has tried to kill us. Shippu spoke. Naruto nodded. Indeed, as did Inuyasha to Kagome when he first met her, as you tried to steal the shards when you first met them, as Miroku tried to suck Inuyasha into his wind tunnel, and as Sango tried to kill Inuyasha at their first meeting. Sango was tricked by Naraku. Kagome defended her friend. Naruto smiled. And how do you know that Naraku is not doing something similar to her? He could have something of hers, she is his incarnation, he gave her life. It is not mind-boggling that he could take it away as well. The group looked at each other warily before Inuyasha decided to speak. Faye, she's your responsibility, Blondie. What? Koga cried outraged. That bitch killed my pack, she deserves to die and I'm gonna be the one to kill her. Ah, Naruto spoke as he turned to the still paralyzed wolf. Koga, I cannot say that it's wrong for you to want revenge, but taking it this way is dishonorable. If you want revenge, you're going to have to earn it. As I did. With those words, the blonde moved towards the broken woman and picked her up bridal style. She winced at his touch and whimpered pitifully. Indeed, he doubted that she served Naraku willingly. Chapter 14, Freedom is the greatest happiness. Numb. That was the only true word that could be used to describe what Kagura awoke to. She felt detached. As if her mind wandered in a realm away from her body. Floating amidst a sea of endless fog. She couldn't see, she couldn't hear, she couldn't feel, she couldn't smell. She could do nothing but wait. Is this death? She quietly asked herself. How long she remained in this state is unknown to her, but eventually she could faintly hear a whisper, or an echo, at the edges of her senses. Blinded and unfeeling as she struggled to follow the sound. To lead herself out of this place that felt so hollow, so empty. As she became aware of herself, of her senses, of her thoughts, the echoes continued to reach, becoming more and more clear as to what they truly were. Voices? She questioned. Her own voice sounded faint in this realm, weak. Are you sure this is going to work? The first voice, of a young woman perhaps. Yet it was familiar as well. Not in the least. The second voice, one that sounded so familiar yet so distant and foreign. But if we do nothing then she dies anyway. Sometimes I wish I would have paid more attention to Tsunade's medical mumbo-jumbo. Who? Never mind, it's not important. Kagura struggled to remain, but her strength failed her and she slowly fell back into darkness. Naruto and Kagome sat near Kagura's bedside. Naruto was adorning the floor with numerous seals as well as putting small paper seals over the places where Kagura's injuries were the worst. They had left the others outside of the village since many of the villagers were very wary of demons, hateful even. Already they had been getting some complimentary stones with notes. Are you sure this is going to work? She asked the blonde, masked ninja. Not in the least. He replied cheerfully, making Kagome sweat drop. But if we do nothing then she dies anyway. Sometimes I wish I would have paid more attention to Tsunade's medical mumbo-jumbo. He muttered the last part under his breath. Who? Kagome asked curiously. All right. I at least have a name now. Indeed, since just a few weeks ago the entire group had joined together and decided that they were each going to piece together as much information about Naruto as they could through bits and pieces of conversation. Many little things make one really big thing eventually. Naruto shook his head. Never mind, it's not important. Kagome's eye twitched in annoyance. But she kept the name imprinted in her mind. Tsunade. The sound of angered villagers reached their ears, making Naruto let out a tired sigh. Here we go again. Kagome sighed as well. Why do they keep doing this? We're staying at a hut, away from the village, basically minding our own business. Naruto stood and wiped his hands. Humans instinctively fear what they do not understand and therefore, try to eliminate it. Kagome turned to him with a slightly angry look. Not all humans are bad. And you're human too. Naruto eyed her for a moment. Perhaps. He said, leaving Kagome to wonder if he was addressing the first statement or the last. Naruto exited the hut and came across the sight of about 36 villagers all standing in front of the hut with pitchforks and torches. Ichen, reminds me of my younger days. He thought to himself with a lazy shrug. Now, what's this about? He asked as he crossed his arms in front of his chest. You there. Ninja, step aside and let us remove this demon filth from our lands. One villager shouted, the others cheering in agreement. Naruto sighed tiredly. He knew this mob mentality and he knew it would be damn near impossible to dissuade them without the use of violent action. She has done nothing to you, so why don't you head back to your homes and rest so you may tend to your fields tomorrow? He said, hoping to reason with them even though he knew it would end in futility. That demon doesn't deserve to live. One man yelled from the back, making Naruto's eyes narrow. This scene was starting to get far too familiar for his tastes. Step out of our way, demon lover. His eyes narrowed further. Indeed, far too familiar. Naruto closed his eyes in an attempt to rein in his anger. This was bringing up far more memories than what he had originally intended. He opened his eyes just as a villager threw a torch to the roof of the house. With a flick of his wrist, a kunai sailed through the air and intercepted the projectile, sending it elsewhere. "Go home," he spoke. His voice was tight and held a clear edge of anger and warning in it. Kagome, who was watching the scene from the small opening the cloth that blocked the entranceway left, was beginning to feel a little nervous. She had never heard his voice like that, and if this was his voice when he was getting angry, she would hate to hear it when he was really pissed. Apparently some of these villagers had a death wish, however. If he stands with the demon, then he deserves to die with it. One yelled, making others cheer in agreement. "He's only one man. He can't defeat us all." More cheers of agreement. "We will remove this taint from our village." That was it. That was the final straw. That comment hit just a little too close to home. It was the villagers always screamed when they felt they had him cornered in his youth. "Enough!" he yelled, sending a powerful gust of wind that sent the villagers flying 50 feet back. They each stood again rather shakily and stared at the ninja with the glint of fear in their eyes. "Go home." He spoke softly, but his voice at that moment was more powerful than the roars of 1,000 thunderstorms, and in a rush the villagers all fled back to their homes. Naruto sighed and pushed the old memories out of his mind as he turned back and entered the hut. Kagome looked at him a little nervously. "What was that about?" Naruto paused for a moment. "Just keeping dead memories buried," he replied, and Kagome suddenly knew that there was much more to Naruto than any of them previously suspected. "Let's get some rest, cured or not. We're leaving this village at dawn and we'll meet up with the others on our way out." Kagome nodded in agreement. Staying here would do more harm than good for Kagura, and while Kagome didn't have any real great love for the wind sorceress, she was not so heartless to let her be harmed or abused while she was at her weakest. Meanwhile, hidden in the darkness of his lair, Naraku snarled in anger. This was not supposed to go this way. Koga was supposed to have taken his revenge on Kagura. Instead, that ninja had ruined everything again. He had miscalculated, he didn't take into account the unknown factor, and now he was in dire straits. Kagura knew where he was and she would lead them here to fight. This wouldn't be much of a problem in itself. He could simply jump to another lair and they would be in the dark again. Problem was, he had no other hideout. He hadn't preoccupied himself to find anything since the group was quite far from his current location and it would take them quite some time to find him given their current progress. But now Kagura could tell them where he was rather easily. He had precious little time to form a proper plan and to find where he would go in case he needed escape. That wouldn't preoccupy him too much if it were just the normal group, but with Kagura and more importantly this Naruto helping them, he begrudgingly had to admit that they could now pose a significant threat. He had to find something on the boy, some weakness. Everyone had at least one. Humans especially. Whatever it was, he would find it, even if it took him 1,000 lifetimes. But for now, he had to prepare for the coming confrontation. Kagura slowly opened her eyes. Her vision was blurry and her head throbbed with pain. The first thing she noticed was the rotten wood of an old worn-down hut and the soft glow of the sun's rays as they filtered through an opening that served as a window. "Where am I?" she asked herself and moved her head weakly in order to look at the room. Her ears suddenly heard the sound of voices outside. "Kagome, are you ready, Kagome?" "But, that's that girl's name, the one who travels with Inuyasha." She heard the sound of approaching footsteps and looked to the doorway just as Naruto entered. Her eyes widened in surprise, and even more so when he turned to her with what appeared to be a smile on his face. "Ah, so you're awake." He walked over to her and felt her tense as he approached. He knelt next to the futon and reached for a bottle of water that was nearby. What do you?" The wind demoness tried to speak, but her voice was hoarse and dry. It felt as if she was scraping her throat with sandpaper. "Shoo." The blonde silenced her. "Don't talk just yet, your injuries are barely treated and you're gonna be weak for a while. You can ask me whatever you want then. But for now, we have to move, meaning I'm going to have to move you. It may hurt, but it's necessary. Staying in this place would cause more harm than good. Do you understand?" Kagura was stunned. Was he actually showing her compassion? It was a foreign concept to her and she felt quite uncomfortable in this situation. The last thing she remembered was pain and Naraku's terrible ruby-red gaze upon her, and now she was here. "Kagura." Naruto's voice brought her back to the living. "I have to move you. Is that okay?" he asked again. Slowly she nodded her head in consent. Naruto quickly formed 2 shadow clones and had them gently lift her up into a sitting position and then onto Naruto's back in a piggyback position. Despite the fact that she was a little disoriented, her mind still registered this and felt that this was rather humiliating, but if the feeling of numbness in her legs was any indication, she wouldn't be walking on this day, using a great deal of what little strength she asked. Why? She had to know, if nothing else to know what her fate would be. She highly doubted they were doing this out of the goodness of their hearts. They probably wanted information. Well, you're injured, and despite the fact that it is the honorable thing to do, you can also tell us where Naraku is. Ah, so they did want information. She wanted to tell them everything. If it was her choice, she would tell them whatever they needed to kill that bastard of a Hanyu. But she couldn't do anything, not while he had her. Wait, he had. What if I was to return your heart to you, Kagura? Smirking, the Dark Lord opened his palm, allowing the red essence of the woman's heart to spill gently around the wind. Yukai. Stupid sorceress. Naraku smiled. You are now whole, but what does that gain you? You now know the true pain of your injuries and defeat. By rights, you should have died in the purifying wave of that Ningen girl, and yet you lived, because I held your heart in my hand. I shielded you from certain death. But now you have back what you have so long sought. Is it as wonderful as you always dreamed, Kagura? She suddenly remembered everything. He had given her her heart. The stupid bastard had given her the heart that rightfully belonged to her. She had her life. She was free. For the first time in her life, Kagura cried tears of happiness, and despite the fact that each of these laughs brought a slight physical pain due to her injuries, she didn't care. She cried and laughed small laughs that felt like a cleansing of her soul. Only one thought mattered in her mind at the moment. I'm free. Naruto felt her movement on his back and smelt the salt of her tears. Somehow, however, he just knew that she wasn't in pain. Well, Midoriko. It appears as though the tides are turning in our favor. He silently thought before making his way outside of the hut to leave. He looked to Kagome, who was heaving that giant thing. She called a backpack onto her back. He nodded to her, and with that they silently began making their way out of the village. On the way out, Kagome, out of curiosity, looked to Kagura and saw on the wind sorceress's face the most content smile she had ever seen, and somehow, she knew they had made the right choice in saving her. Chapter 15, A Strange Encounter. Kagura slowly awoke to the strange combination of yelling, hysterical laughter, and a strange crashing of sorts. Her vision was blurry at first, but as her eyes adjusted to the light, she caught sight of the Inu group. The girl, Kagome, was yelling the word "sit" at the top of her lungs as the Hanyu, Inuyasha, crashed into the dirt over and over again. Off to the side, the rest of the Inu group was heaving with hysterical fits of laughter at the Hanyu's expense. What am I doing here? She mentally asked herself before the events of the last time she was awake returned to her. She smiled slightly at the thought of her new freedom. She soon realized, however, that the ninja was not with the group. She struggled to raise herself up to a sitting position. Every bone and muscle in her body ached and burned in protest to her movements, but nevertheless she continued to struggle. Kagome managed to calm herself down enough to finally notice their, now conscious, guest. She looked around. No Naruto to ease the situation at the moment. Since everyone other than Shippu would most probably show open distrust and perhaps even full-blown hate in Sango and Inuyasha's case. So it was up to her to appease the situation, it seemed. Kagura was startled as she felt someone helping her raise herself. She looked back up and found Kagome's chocolate brown eyes staring back at her. You really shouldn't be moving too much, she said as Kagura finally managed to get herself upright. The others each tensed at the sight of the now conscious wind demoness. Shippu bounded up to Kagome and leapt up to her shoulder. Miroku discreetly slipped a few demonic suppressing seals into his hand. Sango as well slipped a kunai hidden in her sleeve into her hand. And Inuyasha, well, Inuyasha was still face down in the ground, muffling curses to the world. Kagura winced slightly in pain and then looked at the collective group that was staring at her. Kagome shifted from foot to foot nervously as an awkward silence fell over them. This was just too weird. How the hell did you start a conversation with someone who, practically, up until the other day you were both trying to kill each other? She opened her mouth to speak, but Kagura cut her off. What do you all want from me? Kagome snapped her mouth shut and looked around, almost willing Naruto to show up. This was his idea, damn it. Miroku luckily decided to intervene. Information. The monk spoke solemnly as he walked over. About Naraku, I assume, she said as she shifted herself into a more comfortable position. What do you want to know? She asked. She didn't have anything to hide. She would tell them everything within her knowledge. Sango narrowed her eyes in suspicion. You seem awfully cooperative. Kagura shrugged elegantly. I always hated Naraku. He forces his subjects into a bitter slavery. Your brother, along with what I would call my younger sister Kana, follow him like zombies. With no will. Since I was the first of his incarnations, I was born with free will. He corrected that mistake with Kana and any other of his cast-offs. Inuyasha finally managed to stand up from his position on the floor. If you hated him so much, then why did you keep helping him? He stated more than asked. Her eyes darkened considerably. Because the bastard could kill me whenever he damn well wanted to. Kagome and the others each shared glances. Hers of nervousness, Inuyasha's and Sango's of suspicion, and Miroku's quiet contemplation. Another awkward silence descended upon them. This time it was Kagome who broke it. So where is Naraku hiding now? Kagura looked off to the distance. He is to the east. Last I saw, he was near the borders of the wolf tribes. It's hard to tell if he's still there though. You said he could kill you at any time. What's changed? Miroku asked. Kagura sighed. They wouldn't believe it unless they saw it. Everyone watched in silent fascination as a glowing red orb that pulsed regularly emerged from her chest. She held it gingerly in her hands as it pulsed. She smiled and then placed it back in her chest. She stared back up at the group who were staring at her with this strange look. That was my heart. Naraku held it until recently. With it in his possession, he could kill me whenever he wanted. But he slipped up and now it's back where it belongs. So now I don't have to serve him anymore. Faye, you expect me to believe that? Inuyasha declared gruffly as he crossed his arms. It is possible, Inuyasha. Kagome said, making the Hanyu look at her like she was crazy. This is too convenient. Sango spoke. While I do agree it is seemingly too convenient, I cannot discount the possibility that it may be true. Miroku spoke, making both Inuyasha and Sango turn to him with incredulous looks. Shippu and Kirara watched the four argue and bicker over whether they should believe the wind demoness or not believe the wind demoness. The small kid then turned to Kagura. Why don't you tell them something else? Like a weakness he might have or something. Kagura was momentarily taken aback, but in the end decided that she would want to get revenge on the bastard Hanyu that caused her such pain. But in order to do that she would need help, and this group was as good as any. She thought for a moment before a glaring weakness came to her. The same one she had. His heart. She whispered. The entire group stopped squabbling and turned to her. What was that? Inuyasha demanded more than asked. Kagura looked up and smirked. Naraku's heart. What of it? The wind demoness smirked in an almost evil manner, reminiscent of her old enslaver. You know that when you met Naraku on Ementi Hakurii, he was at least 10 times more powerful, right? The group nodded. Good, the reason for that is simple. He got rid of his heart. Faye, bastard didn't have a heart in the first place. Inuyasha snarled. Let her finish, Inuyasha. Kagome admonished. Kagura sighed. Look, you know that Naraku was formed by combining the evil heart of a man called Enigumo and the power of 1,000 low-level yokai, right? Well, Naraku managed to separate the demon side of himself from the human heart that held his power in check. His heart is separated from his body now. He may be powerful, but his heart is a mere infant, literally. He gave his heart the form of a child, and now it's nearly defenseless. All it has is some skill with barriers and the possessing of people's souls. The group looked at each other. So? Sango spoke slowly. We kill this infant, and you kill Naraku. Kagura finished. I'm not sure where he keeps the kid, but wherever it is, it's. She paused suddenly. Her eyes going wide. Inuyasha's nose and ears twitched and he immediately swerved around and stared off into the direction Naruto had left. He's here. Kagura spoke. Damn it. Inuyasha cursed, unsheathing Tetsusaiga. Let's go. Shippu, Kirara, stay here and watch her, make sure she doesn't try anything. The others didn't need to be told to know just who was here. As Ione, they grabbed their weapons and rushed off. Kagura sighed. She wished she could go and deliver some much-deserved punishment onto that damn Hanyu, but in her weakened state and without her fan to control the wind, she was as useless as a kitten. Shippu stared at Kagura with those wide innocent green eyes, making her extremely uncomfortable, and as Kirara, in her smaller form, joined in the staring with those wide creepy red eyes, she felt even more uncomfortable. What? She finally snapped as she glared at them. The little fox kit stared at her for a few more seconds before raising his hand and offering her something. Want a cookie? Naruto meanwhile was silently moving through the trees of the dense forests looking for something that he could kill so he could bring back to the camp. As he moved through the forest, the trees suddenly parted, revealing a beautiful waterfall, its flowing waters creating a harmonic melody that floated through the night air. This sight would normally bring someone peace, yet for him, it was filled with nothing but painful memories. For it reminded him of a certain Hyuga girl that trained in such places. While he never truly grew to love Hinata as she loved him, he did consider her a precious friend. More so than what others believed. It is such a quiet thing. The loss of a life. Almost a whisper amongst the cries and shouts of the world. Yet that lone whisper travels farther and longer than the shouts ever will, and they leave echoes. Echoes that remain and travel farther still. He sighed tiredly and sadly. He looked older then, far older than what one as young as he should have. On the outside he may look normal. But on the inside he felt like nothing but a husk. He did not want to continue this life, if it could be called such. His mask, the emotional one that he had worn for so long, had blurred the feeling of self. He could no longer distinguish between what was an act and what was real. He felt hollow, dead to others and even dead to himself. Who was Uzumaki Naruto? It was a question few ever asked and even fewer still ever managed to answer. Naruto looked at his own hand. Who am I really? He asked himself with a bitter chuckle. He hated himself. He hated the fact that he had survived when they had not. He hated the fact that he, who was supposed to be the sacrifice, had managed to escape the jaws of death while others had been consumed by it. Why did he continue? Why did he prolong this stagnant existence? Life. I don't want to. He whispered to himself. He sighed tiredly. Why are you here? He asked without even looking up. From the dark shadows the forest trees cast the Naraku, wearing his baboon pelt, emerged like a specter. I have a proposition for you, Negan. He spoke. But Naruto noticed that this time his voice did not carry the confident edge it always held when he addressed everyone. The blonde chuckled. I did not think you would be so worried, Naraku. It's barely been a week yet and Kagura has only woke once for a few brief minutes because of the injuries inflicted on her. I didn't think you'd be feeling pressure this soon. He spoke in a taunting tone of voice. Naraku gritted his teeth as he refrained from attacking the blonde. Even with his enhanced powers he still wasn't sure if he could fight and defeat the blonde before the others arrived. He had no doubts that he could defeat this human one-on-one, but with Inuyasha and the others so nearby he wasn't willing to risk it. I am never worried, human. He spat out the word human like it was a curse. I merely wish to make my life easier. I have gathered many items impersonating this human prince. Everyone has a price. Name yours. Naruto hummed, in thought, then snapped his fingers as if he had just had a marvelous idea. How about your head? That's not too difficult, I'm sure. Naraku snarled. Very well. Since you will not be dissuaded, then I suppose I will just have to eliminate you. He said before he exploded forward in a furious attack. Naruto was slightly taken aback by this. It was not Naraku's style to do this, it was too forward. He must be truly desperate then. The blonde took out 2 kunai and swerved left to avoid one of Naraku's tentacles. He jumped over another and backpedaled to avoid a third. With a chakra-enhanced backflip, he managed to put some distance between himself and the spider demon. He tossed his 2 kunai, each with explosive tags, at the demon. Naraku moved his tentacles into the metal projectile's path with a resounding boom. The tags exploded, destroying whole chunks of the rotted flesh that the extensions were made from. But in seconds they were regenerated and Naraku was on the attack again. Naruto narrowed his eyes and formed a simple set of seals. Kirigakira no Jutsu, he whispered, forming a thick mist all around them. With the waterfall nearby, it gave him the advantage. It would be harder to hear him and he had all the water he might need at merely a stone's throw away. Naraku snarled as his tentacles smashed through the tree the ninja had previously been standing on before the mist consumed him. He felt the wood splinter, crack and shatter before the power of his attack, but he knew that he had missed his target. Where the hell had this mist come from anyway? Was this another of the strange Nijin's skills? Before he could think further, a red glow coming from behind him made him turn. His eyes went wide at the sight of a dragon formed from flames emerged from the mist. He swerved to the side, narrowly avoiding the blast. Even so, his baboon pelt was in flames. With a toss it was off and his pale face and dark hair were visible. My, you seem angry, Naraku. Naruto's taunting voice came from all around. You are difficult to kill, Negan. For one as limited as you, perhaps. To have so much power yet no mind to use it. What a waste. The spider demon snarled. I will show you waste, Negan. You will learn to fear my name. The winds shifted and the mist was suddenly blown away. Naraku turned around and found Naruto, standing just a few yards away, holding what appeared to be a glowing ball made of pure energy in his right hand. What is that? Naraku asked himself as he took a step back in fear. The power and intensity of this thing could be felt even from this distance. Naruto glared at Naraku with anger in his eyes. They flashed red for a brief moment before he spoke. I have seen horrors that one as foolish as you can only imagine. I have seen hate. I have seen anger. And I have seen fear. Remember this half-breed, I fear no one. He yelled before he rushed forward. Naraku's eyes went wide with fear as Naruto appeared in front of him with the sphere reared back as he prepared to drive it into his chest. Rasengan! He yelled before he plowed the ball of energy into Naraku's chest. The attack tore and shredded the spider Hanyu to bits. Hidden in his lair, Naraku watched as the wooden doll that represented his puppet was cut in half, indicating its defeat. The memories came to him and he frowned darkly. His puppets usually only had 1/10 of the strength that he had. But the simple fact that the human was able to defeat one by himself and with such a powerful attack unnerved him greatly. It appears as though he would have to reassess the situation. Naruto panted slightly as his attack died down, revealing the torn and scared landscape before him. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath and prepared to return when a presence startled him. He turned his head to the forest on the other side of the waterfall, where he only managed to catch a brief glimpse of a pair of glowing red eyes that seemed all too familiar before he felt a stabbing pain in his head and he blacked out. Wake up, Naruto-chan, came the mocking voice that seemed to echo around him. Wake up, came the mocking voice again, forcing him into the world of semi-consciousness. He opened his eyes, his vision was blurry and dark, as if someone had just smacked him in the back of the head with a sledgehammer. He groans in pain. He tries to lift his arms but to no avail. They feel like lead weights. His head throbbed in pain and his own heartbeat was loud in his ears. Oh, God, shit. Did anyone get the license plate of that truck? He groans as he manages to roll from his back onto his stomach. As he manages to put his hands on the ground in preparation to lift himself, he notices something tied onto his finger. He blinks owlishly before moving his hand to take a closer look. A thong? He asks himself in a disbelieving voice. He tries to pick himself up but the results were less than painless. Ouch! He groans as he hits the floor again. The voices of the others soon reaches him just before Inuyasha lands right next to him. You dead already? The Hanyu asks. Naruto groans. Nice to see you too, Inuyasha. The Hanyu looks around the clearing. What the hell happened? Naruto sighed and muttered under his breath. Well, I just decided that I wanted to see something blow up. What the hell do you think happened, genius? I was attacked. He said sarcastically. Inuyasha immediately becomes incensed. What's that? You want to get your ass kicked even more? Inuyasha, sit. The Hanyu immediately plows into the ground in a nice heap. Kagome and the others of the party joined them as they came out of the tree line. They knelt down around Naruto, Miroku helping him get to his feet and slinging an arm over his shoulder. What happened? Sango asked, followed shortly by Kagome's Are you alright? Never better, the blonde replied. And it appears Naraku doesn't like me much. He wants me dead. Inuyasha managed to lift himself off the ground. Why the hell didn't you give me the straight answer? Naruto blinked and turned to him. Did you say something? Inuyasha had to refrain from murdering Naruto at that moment. So he sent one of his puppets to deal with you? Miroku asked. Naruto chuckled. I assume so, because if you've been fighting such a weak opponent for such a long time and haven't managed to beat him yet, then you guys are in worse shape than I thought. Inuyasha huffed and crossed his arms. Well, you seem to have done a good job of getting your ass kicked. Naruto chuckled. Make no mistake, Inuyasha. It was not Naraku that did this to me. Everyone stared at him startled. Then who was it? Sango asked. Naruto remained quiet for several moments. Don't know. He lied. Luckily, Inuyasha distracted as he was didn't pick up on it through scent. Let's head back to camp. They all nodded and together began heading back. Chapter 16, Misplaced Hate. Hirekatsu. Sango yelled as she hurled her boomerang weapon at the large bear yokai that was attacking them. The massive weapon soared through the air and with a sickening sound cut through flesh and bone, severing the yokai's left arm. With a howl of pain and rage, the massive bear charged at the Tajia. Sango's boomerang came back around just in time for her to use it as a shield as the bear yokai took a swipe at her. Even though the Hirekatsu took the brunt of the attack, she was still sent flying back. With a painful thud, her back hit a tree trunk. She groaned and looked back up just as the bear was prepared to take another swipe at her. Before its claws came down, however, Inuyasha, in his full red-clad glory, leapt at the yokai and with a battle cry its last arm was severed with a swipe from the Tetsusaiga. The bear yokai howled in pain again before an arrow, bathed in holy purification power, flew through the air and hit the demon square in the forehead, turning him to ash. Inuyasha khed and hefted his sword onto his shoulder. This is getting ridiculous. None of these guys are a decent challenge anymore, even with the shards. Such is the skill that comes with proper training. Inuyasha. Naruto spoke as he entered the clearing Nine with Naraku and Kagura, now able to walk, following closely behind him. While the group still showed a mild unease in her presence, it was a step up from the thinly veiled suspicion they had regarded her with for the first few weeks. Her injuries had healed well, yet still, without a proper fan she was nigh useless in a fight. So she hung back most of the time, simply observing the proceedings until they could find a proper fan for her. It wasn't easy. Few fans could harness and focus a demon's yoki. Only demon-made fans were capable of such a thing, and those were extremely rare. Sango grunted as she picked herself up and groaned at the sight of a cracked Hirekatsu. Damn it. She cursed under her breath. Inuyasha heard her curse and turned to her as he sheathed his blade. What the hell is your problem? He asked in his usual gruff tone. Sango glared at him and lifted the Hirekatsu so he and her companions could get a better view. This is my problem, Inuyasha. Now I have to head back to my village to have it repaired. Inuyasha growled. Hell no. It'll take you at least a whole week to go there and come back. Naruto, deciding to appease the situation, decided to step in before Sango decided to break Hirekatsu completely on the Hanyo's skull. Those who fail to prepare to fail. She has to have her weapon repaired. It is better to repair it now than to have it break mid-battle. Miroka nodded as he gave his consent. Yes, Inuyasha, Naruto is right. And besides, I must go to the old monk who raised me, forgot this guy's name, and have him check my wind tunnel to make sure everything is well. I think it may have widened some more since we last visited him. Inuyasha was about to protest when Kagura spoke. In my time with Naraku, I had found a few fans similar to my own. I kept them hidden in case he ever chose to disarm me. I think I've recovered enough to make the trip. Wench, if you think I'm just gonna go and crawl back to Naraku, then you've got another thing coming. Kagura looked incensed at his words. To think that she would ever crawl back to Naraku was an insult in itself. Naruto held up a hand. Let her go. What? Inuyasha roared. She won't do anything to betray us. He spoke and then turned his head to look at Kagura from the corner of his eyes. Will you, Kagura? It was a threat, not a question, and his blue eyes seemed to pierce her, like a spear through a balloon. She held back a shiver and nodded. Inuyasha still looked like he was about to protest when Kagome spoke, sealing the deal. And I have to head back home. I'm running out of ramen and supplies. That shut him up good. If there was one thing Inuyasha couldn't resist, it was the lure of ramen. But then a thought occurred to him. Hey, wait a minute. I've only eaten 2 bowls of those things since you last came back. Kagome looked at him oddly. Really? Yes. Really? He imitated her with a huff. Then his eyes darkened and he turned to glare at the only blonde in the group, who seemed to find the surrounding tree tops quite interesting. He growled lowly when Naruto suddenly spoke to Sango. Sango, did your village ever keep any records of sorts on ancient demons? He phrased a little uncertainly. Sango looked at him with a little of what seemed like surprised excitement. Why, yes. My father showed me the chambers once. They were hidden in a cave not too far from Midoriko's cave. When the demons raided the village and destroyed everything, they didn't know of the cave's existence, and so nothing was harmed. Why do you ask though? Naruto took a moment to answer. There's a certain demon I would like to look up. Kagome narrowed her eyes in suspicion. A demon? He had asked to look up a certain scroll that was supposedly written by a demon in my time. What was the demon's name again? Kikyo something. I know it started with a K, damn it. What's the demon's name? Maybe I can remember it from some of the scrolls I read. Sango spoke. Naruto waved her off. No, I can't remember the name unless I see it. He lied, doing his best to mask not only his body language, tone of voice and features but his scent as well. Inuyasha and Shippu may pick up on it. Well, do you at least remember what type of demon it was? Naruto had a short internal conflict as to whether or not to disclose that information. But if he said that he didn't remember, that may arouse suspicion. Yes, it was a fox demon. Sango looked taken aback. A fox demon? She asked with what appeared to be slight astonishment. Fox demons are very tricky and hardly ever grow to be truly powerful in comparison to other demons. Hey! Shippu cried out indignantly. They are masters of stealth and only 2 or 3 were ever known to cause any sort of devastation to the land. Unlike with the dog demons or dragons that have caused quite a bit of destruction in their day. Ha, you see that runt? We're better than you. Inuyasha goaded the little fox kid. Shippu smirked evilly, a smirk that Inuyasha saw clear as day. Wah, Kagome, Inuyasha is being mean. He wailed. Why that little sit boy? Crash. I'm gonna kill that little shit. The Hanyu mentally promised himself. Naruto watched as Inuyasha plowed into the ground and blinked several times before turning to Miroku. In which direction is the monk you're gonna see? Miroku pointed south. Just that way, I would say, over 8 hills and 4 valleys. Naruto nodded and turned to Kagura. And your objective? Kagura hesitated for only a moment as she debated whether or not to trust them. She decided that it was in her best interest to gain their trust. It's in the same direction. Just a bit farther. She answered. Naruto nodded and turned to Sango. And yours? It's back the way we came, just a little more northwest. Naruto nodded. Good, I'll be joining you then. He then turned to Kagome. Where do we meet up? Kagome shrugged. At Kid's village, I guess. Inuyasha stood and glared at the kitsune, who was avoiding his gaze intently. He snorted and crossed his arms. Whatever. Let's just set up camp here and we'll leave in the morning. Naruto nodded. I would go out hunting, but I really don't want to have to deal with a sequel to the events of the other night. Inuyasha feyed and walked over. Just make sure you keep up, he said before taking off. Naruto smiled and waved at the group before following. The group each looked at each other. Kagura was a bit more tense now. Even though Kagome showed her some form of support, Naruto was the one that truly held off the brunt of the others' piercing gazes. Sango's in particular was rather venomous. Even though she understood where the demon slayer's hatred was coming from, that didn't mean she would tolerate it. As Sango continued to glare at Kagura, the wind demoness returned at full force, refusing to back down despite her lack of a proper weapon. The tension between the two was so thick you could cut it with a knife. The very air seemed to cackle and waver between them. Kagome and Miroku shared a glance and gave each other a silent nod of agreement. Sango, why don't you and I move to set up the camp? Miroku suggested gently as he led her aside. She seemed a little miffed at being interrupted, but in the end decided to follow. Kagura watched her go and then felt a tap on her shoulder. She turned slightly and saw Kagome with a gentle smile on her face, with Shippu peacefully perched above her shoulder. I think there's a stream nearby. Would you like to help me go and refill our canteens? Kagura hesitated for a moment before nodding, and the two began following. No one noticed Naraku's insect as it flew away to report back to his master. Sango watched the two leave with an angry scowl on her face. She did not like the presence of the wind demoness. The mere thought that she may have helped in the death of her family and the subsequent brainwashing of her brother into nothing but a mere slave caused her blood to boil. A part of her would have preferred to have just left the wind demoness on the field where they had found her, broken and as fodder for the low-level beasts, or to Koga's vengeance. One part of her whispered that she would be no better than Naraku himself if she would have done that. But another part couldn't help but feel bitter, even hateful against her. She blamed her for her brother's slavery, despite the fact that she knew her village was destroyed before Kagura had even been spawned from Naraku. Still, even though she isn't to blame, by human nature alone, coupled with her frustration at Naraku's constant escapes and the continued slavery of her brother, she needed an outlet. Someone to blame, and at the moment, Kagura was the easiest target. She caught Miroku staring at her with a strange look that mixed sadness, sympathy, and slight disappointment. What? She snapped in a very Inuyasha-like way. Miroku jumped slightly and merely continued making camp, pointedly ignoring her, or rather, her furious glare. As Kagome, Kagura and Shippu came across a small stream, Kagome kneeled down as Shippu bounded off her shoulder. The two of them dipped their canteens into the water and watched as air bubbles came up, indicating that they were filling up. Kagura hesitated for a moment before she knelt next to her and did the same. Kagome sighed. "I'm sorry about Sango. She's just having a hard time adjusting to this. Harder than all of us anyway." Kagura looked at the girl with shock clear on her features. Was she trying to comfort her? It's fine, I suppose. She uncharacteristically stuttered. "I understand her behavior, that does not mean however that I will merely roll over and allow her to do it unopposed," she said, tossing a relatively mild glare toward the Miko, expecting to be opposed. To her shock, Kagome nodded in consent. "I can understand that. Just please try and be patient with her. She'll come around eventually." Shippu happily bounded up onto Kagome's shoulder and smiled at the wind demoness. "Yeah, Sango's really nice. It'll just take her a little while to get over the part that you had helped Naraku." Kagome smiled at the kit's antics and then stood as she turned back to the camp. "Let's head back." Kagura nodded, slightly dumbfounded. She had expected the Miko favoring the Tejia, thus causing an argument and even more hostility between herself and the group. But it had not occurred. Instead, they had shown her understanding and even acceptance. She stood and began following them back to the camp. Naraku listened to the insect as it reported all the information it had discovered back to him. So the group was splitting up. Unfortunately, the Miko and Inuyasha were too powerful together for anyone short of himself to go now that he had lost Kagura. He didn't know where his incarnation would go, and attacking the ninja may mean bringing out a good portion of his power, making it easy for his enemies to find him. That he didn't want. No human's greatest weakness was their emotions. And the most emotional of the humans were the females. He had to cause a rift in the group. Killing the monk wouldn't do it, but killing the Tejia might. Because of her love and determination to save her brother, Sango would fight a way through her grief until she either succeeded or failed in her vendetta. The monk's feelings for the wench were no secret. Killing her would cause him to grow emotional and would mess him up in battle, thus making him easier to kill, and the priestess, Kagome, would also lose strength considering that Miko abilities were ruled by one's emotions. The loss of both her friends would cause her too much grief to be much more useful than what she once was before her training. But still, killing the demon slayer was impossible with the ninja there, unless he found a way for the Tejia to kill herself. Indeed, the death of her brother may just cause her the distress and grief necessary to drive her to the brink of suicide, and without her friends there to console her, she may not recover or last long enough for them to reach her. This happening in the ninja's presence would also discredit him, causing distrust amongst the group. Indeed, this was good. He would succeed or he would fail, and failure only meant that he would lose Kahaku. The gain was well worth the risk. After all, the boy's life held no true value to him. He smirked as he stood. "Kahaku," he called, and the boy appeared as he slid open the rice paper door. "I have a mission for you, little Kahaku." Late in the night, as the animal Inuyasha and Naruto lay roasting over the fire, Shippu and Kirara were curled together in the sleeping bag, having eaten their fill. Kagome was jotting down notes in her diary as Miroku slept a few feet away from her. Kagura and Inuyasha also slept in the treetops. Inuyasha out of habit, and Kagura due to the fact that she was closer to the wind that way. But Sango still lay awake, sharpening her sword with a stone since Hirekatsu was currently broken. Her eyes were ablaze with anger. In a way, she felt betrayed by the group. She had seen the way they had conversed with her as they ate. Almost as if they had never been enemies. While Inuyasha and Miroku didn't act so much as friends, they didn't exactly orchestrate her out either. Kagome, Naruto, Shippu, and even Kirara, however, were all different stories. Naruto she could understand. Him having only recently joined their group, he didn't understand the hardships they had all gone through because of her. All the battles they had fought and the blood they had spilled because of her. But for Kagome, Shippu, and even Kirara, the Nico yokai she had since she was just a child, to have showed her such acceptance felt as a betrayal in and of itself. With hard eyes, sparks flew as she traced the stone over the blade again. Now why so angry? She heard Naruto's voice. She turned her head and found him comfortably leaning against a tree just a few feet away. She huffed angrily and turned away, indicating that she wanted to be left alone. Naruto looked at her for a few moments before he spoke. If you wish to hate Sango, then hate, but do it for a proper reason. Do not hate one for crimes he or she did not commit. It just ends up being more painful for the both of them if that's the case. Just leave, you don't know anything about it. She said, her voice a harsh whisper as she did not wish to wake the others. But the fist clenching the stone and sword were clear indications of her anger, and the salty smell of her tears indicated that she was struggling not to cry. Perhaps, he said before silently stalking off into the dim light the fire cast onto the camp. Kagome watched the small exchange from behind the cover of her diary. It was clear that whatever had been said did not go very well. Naruto stopped just a few feet away from the fire and he suddenly looked up. Kagome noticed this and followed his gaze. Above them was the familiar sight of one of Kikyo's soul collectors. Kagome's heart clenched painfully at the sight and her gaze immediately shifted to her Hanyu companion. He was already rousing, soon he would be fully awake. As expected, the second Inuyasha's conscious mind kicked in. They only heard a whispered "Kikyo" before he took off into the trees after her. Kagome once again felt the familiar twinge in her chest, but then felt a comforting hand on her shoulder. She looked up and found Naruto giving her a reassuring smile from behind his face mask. His eyes were gentle and he gave her shoulder a reassuring squeeze before he launched after the Hanyu. Curiosity getting the better of her, Kagome followed, despite the fact that the end of this road may lead her to another painful witnessing of a moment between Inuyasha and Kikyo. Moments later she was able to see them. It was a familiar sight. Inuyasha stood, looking at his long-dead lover, and she stood just a few feet away. "Inuyasha," she said as she greeted him with the same cold, dead tone she always used. Her features were blank, no visible emotions marring them. Inuyasha stepped forward, but that was as far as he got. Two nettles flew from the shadows of the forest and hit him in the neck. His head gave a small jerk and his eyes rolled to the back of his head. He hit the ground with a soft thud. Kikyo and Kagome, who was watching from the tree-line, each gave identical gasps of surprise and horror at the sight. Kagome was about to move forward when one of Naruto's shadow clones appeared in front of her and whispered, "He'll be fine, he's just unconscious," he said. Kagome didn't care at the moment and tried to move past him to get to Inuyasha. Naruto grabbed her shoulder firmly and held her in place. "This must be said and you must hear it." He spoke rather cryptically before the clone vanished in a puff. Kagome bit her lip hard as she was torn in her decision. In the end she decided to trust the ninja. He hadn't lied or given her any reason not to believe him, and given his skills he could have killed Inuyasha and the rest of them whenever he damn well wanted to, so she decided to trust him. Kikyo moved forward and knelt beside Inuyasha in order to help him, but a voice directly behind her made her stop in her tracks. "There will be time for that later on, Kikyo, but for now, your business is with me." Kikyo turned and saw a ninja standing just before the tree line, staring at her with blank blue eyes. She stood and notched an arrow in her bow. "What do you want, assassin?" she spoke, her tone rather venomous. Naruto smirked. The truth. Chapter 17, Look Underneath the Underneath. Naruto stood facing the revived priestess. His gaze and features held their usual amused laziness while hers was her usual piercing coldness. "What truth do you speak of?" she asked. The arrow she currently had notched in her bow glinted in the pale moonlight. Naruto's eyes curved upwards in a smile before he absently turned and walked toward a nearby tree and touched its bark as if searching for something. "I had thought you dead again, Lady Kikyo, consumed by Naraku's miasma." It was more of a question than a statement. The dead priestess narrowed her eyes at the ninja. "How do you know of that, and what concern is it of yours?" she asked back. I asked you first." He chided as he waged his finger from left to right, as if mocking her. She narrowed her eyes at him and let her arrow fly. She would not indulge this foolish ninja's questions. The pink light of her purification power cut through the darkness of the night and sailed toward its target. To Kikyo's immense surprise, however, her arrow did not pierce flesh and bone, but instead found itself easily held between two fingers from which smoke rose. Now, is that really necessary?" he chided again before dropping the arrow with a clatter of wood against earth. Now then, as I was saying, I'm curious as to how you survived. He said as he turned his attention to the tree again. Kikyo narrowed her eyes at him. Few people short of a mid-level demon could catch an arrow with such ease. I was attacked by Naraku, true, but one as limited as he does not have the strength to kill me. She said. He seemed to have succeeded once already. Naruto said simply as he rolled his eyes to the side to meet hers, only to find hers narrowed even further in anger. She quickly hid her anger at his comment and glared into his dull blues. And how would one as yourself know of the events of that day? Unless one of Inuyasha's group told you, you'd have to be at least 60 to even remember that day. Kagome, who was watching the events, from her place hidden amongst the trees, also grew suspicious. How does he know that? I haven't heard him talking to Miroku, Sango, or Shippu about it. He certainly hasn't asked me, and Inuyasha never likes to talk about it. Could Kid have told him? That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? How do I know? He said cheerily as he rounded to face her fully. Tell you what, I'll tell you how I know if you answer my question truthfully. How's that sound? He asked with a waggle of his eyebrows. Almost as if he was playing with a child rather than a priestess, long dead. She looked contemplative for a moment. This ninja seemed to know much of what he shouldn't. He seemed to know about her, yet she knew nothing of him. She decided that whatever question he asked her wouldn't be so bad, and figuring out just how he acquired the knowledge was worth whatever risk she would take indulging him. She slowly nodded. Naruto's smile widened slightly. Good, good. Now my question to you is simple. Do you hate Inuyasha? She narrowed her eyes at him. Why do you ask such a thing? I asked first. He said again. His childish nature was truly beginning to grate on her nerves. Now, your answer please. He said, his eyes losing some of their mirth and gaining a slightly serious edge, even though he still held his smile. Yes. I do. She answered simply, without seemingly any hesitation. Naruto eyed her critically. He remained silent for a moment before he spoke again. Now, didn't I say to answer the question truthfully? He said with a raised eyebrow. She remained expressionless and said nothing. So you choose to play the stoic? He said before he began walking around the clearing. You want to know what I think, priestess? He said as he rubbed his chin. Your foolish beliefs are no concern of mine. I've spoken the truth. If you choose not to believe so, that is your choice, assassin. I think. He continued on, ignoring her. That you don't hate Inuyasha at all. He turned his eyes onto her. Isn't that right? Lady Kikyo. He said, this time, his eyes lost all traces of mirth and were now deadly serious. She narrowed her eyes at him. Your opinion matters not, but I am curious as to how you arrived at such a ridiculous conclusion. Naruto tilted his head to the side and raised his hands in an exasperated shrug. Pure logic, really. If you truly hated Inuyasha, like you say you do, then why is it that on the day you died, the day you bound him to the Gashimboku, the day when the emotions of hurt, raw betrayal and anger were flowing through you freely, all restrictions tossed to the wind, why didn't you just simply kill him then? Kagome, from her hidden location in the trees, had to stifle a gasp at that. She had never thought of it that way. Indeed, if Kikyo did hate Inuyasha like she said, then she would have simply killed him outright the day Naraku had tricked them. Instead she had sealed him away. Her eyes widened by a fraction, the only indication of her shock at this statement. But she quickly recovered and masked her emotions and simply glared at him. Fool, I simply did not have the strength to do so on that day. She said heatedly. Naruto raised an eyebrow. Oh, so you didn't have the strength to aim your arrow into his heart and kill him, but you did have the strength to cast a spell on an arrow that would seal him away until your reincarnation broke it. Her grip on her bow tightened considerably. He was making her very uncomfortable, he noticed. I'm right, aren't I? You never did hate Inuyasha, did you? Be silent. She said harshly, her eyes were alight with anger. You speak of things you know nothing of. You know nothing of me. I do hate that filthy Hanyu, with all of my being. Are you trying to convince me or yourself? He asked. She snapped her eyes towards his and glared. With the precision and speed of a professional, she had another arrow in her bow. I said be silent. When you were revived. He continued. Your soul was torn in two, between yourself and your reincarnation, Kagome. Kagome, not having any ill feelings within her and also having a rather strong will, was able to take back her soul. You, however, I imagine, having still no knowledge over Naraku's treachery and still believing that Inuyasha had betrayed you, felt the same emotions of betrayal, hurt and anger. Those emotions allowed you to keep at least that portion of your soul, allowing you to continue amidst the living. He paused. And so, you kept those emotions close at heart. At least until you discovered Naraku and how he lured you both into his trap. Then you found that you could no longer hold those feelings against him. Silence, she said. Just short of yelling in a second, her arrow flew through the air again and with a grunt of pain was embedded into Naruto's right shoulder. He pulled it out without even a wince of pain. He threw the arrow to the forest floor and began approaching her. But you wanted to, didn't you? You wanted to blame him, you wanted to hate him. No, you needed to hate him. In order to maintain the small bit of the soul you have left. But you couldn't, could you? She said nothing. So the feeling of anger and betrayal were there no longer and the hurt was fading as well. But then you found something else to be hurt about, didn't you? You found Kagome. She fired again, making him lean to the side to avoid another arrow. I am warning you. If you are not silent, I will kill you. Why so angry, Kikyo? He asked as he continued his walk. Lies and false opinions are easily brushed off. It's the truth that stings, isn't it? He said as he smirked. So, Kagome, then. You realized that Inuyasha was quickly gaining feelings for her, didn't you? And so soon after he had learned you were dead too. And that hurt, didn't it? It hurt every time you thought about it. A different kind of hurt, true, but it was still enough of a negative emotion to maintain a decent hold on the portion of the soul you had control of. He stopped when he was directly in front of her. Her arrow was held firmly and the tip was just a few inches from his neck. She stared into his eyes. A flurry of emotions were visible in them and he stared back. His gaze was stone. But then it became harder and harder to maintain that emotion, didn't it? Because eventually you didn't want to feel the hurt anymore. You didn't want to have to feel the pain. You wanted it to end, didn't you? Because he still loved you, it was causing all three of you grief. And so, you sought a solution. He paused and stared at her for a brief moment before he continued. Since you couldn't hate him yourself, then you sought to have him hate you instead. That's why you gave Kagome's shards to Naraku and that's why you tried to kill Kagome. You want Inuyasha to hate you. Because if he does, then he won't love you anymore. He won't hurt Kagome and you anymore through his indecision. He chooses you. Kagome is hurt but has a chance to start over with another. He chooses her and you no longer have to feel hurt over the fact that he cannot decide between the two of you and it can end. She stared at him with a fierceness that was hardly ever seen in her eyes. I should kill you. Her voice was harsh and held more emotion than what was usually heard from her. If what I say isn't true, then by all means. He said, indicating the arrow which was currently poised to go through his throat. She held her weapon there for a few more seconds before she slowly shifted it to point to the ground and ease the tension on the bowstring. Before Naruto could say or do anything, a swarm of her soul collectors descended upon them, their soft glow lighting the area. They began to lift her into the air in preparation to take her away. Before she was out of earshot, he yelled to her. Kikyo! You can't run from the truth forever. And one day, the pain will become far too much. She didn't say anything, merely allowed her seimyoshu to carry her away. Naruto sighed as she vanished and quietly moved and hoisted Inuyasha over his shoulder to carry him back to camp. He walked over to the tree where Kagome was sitting, with silent tears falling down her cheeks. She had never truly understood Kikyo. If what Naruto had said that night was true, then this added an entire new perspective to the dead priestess. She looked up as a shadow fell over her head and found Naruto offering a hand to help her up. Why did you want me to hear this? She asked as she looked down. Because you deserve to, and I wanted you to know her reasons. She remained quiet for a moment before she spoke again. How do you know so much? You've barely been with us 3 months and already, you've been deciphering us, breaking down all of our barriers and finding the heart of the matter. How could you have known so much about her? Few people do things out of simple malice, Kagome. They each always have a reason. Either for power, wealth, revenge, but there always is a one. One reason, no matter how selfish, is still a reason. Few destroy just because they want to destroy. You sound like you've met someone who did. Naruto paused. Perhaps. He stated simply. Then how can you be so sure you're right and she doesn't really hate Inuyasha? She asked as she looked back up at him. Naruto remained quiet for a few moments before he answered. Because I have seen the face of hatred. I've witnessed it and experienced it in all its forms. Her eyes hold no hate when they look upon him, or you for that matter. I know this, such is the life of a Jinchuriki, I suppose. He said, almost speaking to himself more than her. A what? He realized his mistake and immediately looked away. It's nothing. Come on, let's head back. He said, changing the subject as he turned to walk away. She moved and caught his wrist firmly. No, wait. What was that word, Naruto? Why won't you tell us anything about yourself? He stayed quiet for a moment and didn't move a muscle. Slowly he turned his head and looked at her through the corner of his eye. Some things, Kagome, some things are better left forgotten. He whispered before gently pulling his hand away from her grip and walking back towards the camp, with Inuyasha's unconscious form slung over his shoulder. Chapter 18, Power of Old. The next morning Inuyasha groaned as his mind returned to the conscious realm. What the hell happened? The last thing he remembered was, before he could think, he felt two fingers go over his eyelids and pull them up. His eyes stung from the bright light. When they came into focus he could see Naruto's brightly smiling masked visage about 2 inches from his face. Surprise! He yelled, making Inuyasha yell and jump slightly, losing his balance and crashing to the forest floor from his perch on the tree. He let out a muffled groan of pain and lifted his head and found the rest of the group already breaking camp and packing everything. What the hell? I'm the one who's usually up first. He silently wondered from his place on the floor. Naruto jumped in front of him and knelt down. Since you seem to be so tired, we decided to let you rest. We're almost done and we'll be leaving soon. Inuyasha didn't say anything as he stood. His head was throbbing, and not just from the impact with the ground. Just what the hell had he done the other night? Don't we all ask ourselves that question at least once? Naruto straightened and turned back to camp in order to continue packing. He hoped Inuyasha's memory wouldn't return until he was far away from the camp. He didn't want to deal with the headache. Kagome's aura was subdued and the events of the other day continued to play out in her mind over and over. The reasons for Kikyo's actions had shook her, more than what she even knew it. But the most glaring event was that single word. That one statement that had slipped from their blonde companion. Such is the fate of a Jinchuriki, I suppose. She eyed him from the corner of her eye. Her logical, at least for the moment, mind already forming connections at a rapid pace. Jinchuriki, at least that's what he called himself. It's not like anything I've ever heard, but he is searching for a specific demon. Maybe there's a connection. With this thought in mind, she silently picked up a bucket and turned to Sango. I'd like to go wash my face. Sango, do you want to come? She asked sweetly. This was not a question. Whenever Kagome wanted to discuss something private with Sango and the luxury of hot springs wasn't around, Kagome had developed this secret way of getting away from the men. So following proper protocol, she nodded and smiled brightly at the other girl. Sure, Kagome. I'll come too. Shippu said happily as he bounded up onto Kagome's shoulder. Kagome thought for a moment before she smiled and nodded. Shippu, being a demon, may have some insight despite his relatively short life experience. And with his sharper hearing, perhaps he could catch some more of Naruto's slip-ups. As one, the three left. Alright, what happened, Kagome? Sango said after they were relatively far from the camp. Kagome sighed. Well, last night I was, talking with Naruto and he may have let something slip about his past. At this, both Shippu and Sango's ears seemed to twitch in her direction and they leaned in to hear more. It was no secret that the secret of Naruto's past was something that everyone was beginning to find highly irritating and everyone was starting to want answers. Since he was looking for information on some fox demon, I thought maybe it would have had something to do with that. I was thinking that at the same time you and him went back to your village to fix your weapons, Sango, that when he went to go look for whatever he was gonna look for in the archives, that you could look up the word he let slip. Sango nodded. Alright, but what was the word? A Jinchuriki. Sango nodded when Shippu spoke up. I remember an old story or something my daddy told me once that had that word. But I don't know what it specifically means. That got Kagome thinking. If it was an old story to a demon, then it must be old, perhaps one of the older demons they meet up with, like Koga, or perhaps even Sesomaru would know. But asking the frigid Teokai for anything was not on Kagome's to-do list, especially considering that she would probably just get her head lobbed off in the process. Then a sudden thought occurred to her. Would Kagura know? The Slayer's face darkened considerably, but she did not let her anger cloud her judgment. Perhaps. She conceded tightly. Kagome sighed. Sango's anger wasn't healthy. But still, she didn't have the guts to tell her that. As a matter of fact, the only people she could even think of that would have the guts for that would be either Naruto or Sesshomaru. Of course, the later would probably just beat her within an inch of her life or cleave her in half with Tokujin before even showing a hint of concern for any human other than that small child Rin that traveled with him. As the three came back to camp, it was Inuyasha and Naruto that were there. Kagura, apparently wanting to make good time, decided to leave as early as possible on her feather. Miroku, not wanting to have to walk over 5 hills and 7 valleys along with God knows what else, wanted to hitch a ride with her, even though he was visibly nervous as they took off. Whether it was from flying or from the fact that he was going to be alone with the wind demoness was unknown, however. "Faye, about time you got back." The dog Hanyu greeted, roughly. Naruto sighed and waked him on the head with what appeared to be a light tap. Of course, he had put chakra into it in order to form a very crude version of Tsunade's punch. While he didn't have the control for it, he most certainly had the concept. Focus all the chakra at one point and release it upon impact. So what appeared to be a light tap sent Inuyasha clutching his head in pain. Naruto then walked forward and smiled at Kagome. "Take care of one-man army, you two," he said as he spoke to Shippu and Kagome, referring to Inuyasha. Kagome smiled, though it was rather subdued, and nodded. Shippu smiled brightly at the blonde and nodded cheerily. Naruto smiled back and turned to Sango. "Well, shall we?" he said. Sango nodded as Kirara bounded up to her shoulder. And together they began heading northwest. The Lord of the Western Lands was a patient demon lord when it came to certain matters, and in others he wasn't patient. One such example was the insolence of his Hanyu brother, another was anyone questioning his orders or doubting his strength. One thing he did have patience for was the gathering of knowledge, however. Indeed, when he was not out patrolling his lands or slaughtering a troublesome faction of rampaging demons, the Lord of the West would spend hours upon hours in his study. His thousands upon thousands of scrolls and books gathered through the ages since the time his grandfather had founded the Western Lands to the rule and expansion brought on by his father Inu no Taicho all the way to his relatively recent rule. Almost 4,500 years of history was in his study. But each one of them had failed to give him the knowledge of whatever power that lone human had demonstrated that day on his borders. Frustrated by the lack of knowledge, Sesshomaru turned to the last place he was able, to a being far older than any demon currently in existence, believed to be slightly older than Totosai by just a few centuries but could in reality be far far older than that. The ancient tree, Goshinki. Sesshomaru highly respected this demon, not only for its ancient knowledge and experience but also for the simple fact that this lone being controlled far more power than that of most, for it was Goshinki's branches which now served as the sheaths of Tetsusaiga and Tenseiga. The ancient tree's knowledge of the forest, its ability to listen to everything within the Western Lands and far beyond was to be respected and even feared at times. For knowledge and power of the mind was far greater than any weapon or physically powerful berserker. As the dog demon approached the clearing where the ancient tree resided, the leaves, vines, and branches seemed to part for him, as if welcoming his visit. "Ah, Sesshomaru, to what do I owe the visit?" The ancient tree spoke. His rough and dry, yet gentle voice seemed to roll all across the area. Sesshomaru narrowed his eyes at the ancient bark. "You will not address me so familiarly, Goshinki, I am not as lenient as my father in such matters. You will address me with the proper respect." "Ah, of course, Lord Sesshomaru. But still, I do not believe you have come here to merely inform me of your position as Lord of the Western Lands." Sesshomaru growled low in displeasure. He hated this ancient's lack of respect. But the tree was useful at times, and now was one of those times. "Goshinki, do you know anything of the power a human recently demonstrated near the Western Lands?" he asked, getting to the point. "Ah, you mean the ancient one." Goshinki spoke, making Sesshomaru's eyes narrow. "Ancient one?" Sesshomaru imitated as he raised a perfect eyebrow in the tree's direction. "No, I do not expect you to know anything of it. A pup such as yourself would be lucky to have even had a passing ear to any of the ancient tales." Sesshomaru growled at the insult. "Speak what is useful, fool, or I shall be on my way." Goshinki's branches moved as if waving him off. Of course, Teokai," he said as he gained his seriousness again. "I do not know what events have caused his arrival, but that human holds ancient power that was lost with the rising of the Nine." Sesshomaru stiffened and glared at the tree. "Do you think me a fool, Goshinki? The Nine is nothing but a legend of the old. A fairy tale to scare the younglings. He spoke heatedly. Believe it or not, Sesomaru, the 9 did exist. I was but a small shrub during their rise back when humans that were just as powerful if not more so than any Teiokai or Hanyu of these times existed. With the rise of the 9 the human kingdoms fell into ruin, their powers lost and their wills broken. The 9 then faded back into the pages of history. Their offspring, their power diminished over the ages, leaving you and other Teiokai as the result. Sesomaru growled again as the edges of his eyes slowly bled into red. How dare you insinuate that I am inferior to anyone, you old fool? I will soon surpass even my father in strength. Goshinki chuckled amusedly. I only speak the truth. Do you not find it odd that the 9 demons said to be worth 100 Teiokai were nigh invincible, beings that all demons supposedly descend from? Why is it that there have not been any extremely powerful demons since? Your father, his true form was over 500 feet high, and yet you, who are also descended from a powerful dog Demonis, are only a mere 40 feet, the demon's blood is diminishing. Its power too stagnant without any counterbalance. As the humans grow weaker, so do we. Simply because we do not have the need for such power. The 9 did, but once they killed off the ancients and their power, they did not have a need for such destruction. Perhaps now, with the ancients' revival and return, we will see the demon blood rise again, but for now, you shall continue passing yourselves as the sad excuses that call themselves demons. Sesomaru's eyes were alight with fury as he turned and stalked away from the ancient tree. I will destroy this human, then we shall see who is the sad excuse, old fool. Be careful, Lord Sesomaru, you may come out of that fight losing much more than just your arm. The ancient tree chuckled amusedly. I bid you luck in your endeavor, Inu no Taicho. He may have given the title with mock respect, but the insinuation was there. You are not your father. That's it for the part 3 of this series. Thank you for watching and see you in the next video.